The Decembrist Revolt of December 1825 stands as one of the earliest and most significant attempts to challenge autocratic rule in Russia. Though ultimately unsuccessful, this uprising by a group of military officers and noblemen against Tsar Nicholas I's ascension to the throne marked a pivotal moment in Russian history. It not only revealed deep societal discontent with the autocratic system, but also laid the groundwork for subsequent reform movements and revolutionary ideologies that shaped Russia's future. The roots of the Decembrist revolt can be traced back to Russia's experiences during the Napoleonic Wars. The defeat of Napoleon and the participation of Russian troops in Western Europe exposed many Russian officers to liberal and constitutional ideas that had taken hold in countries such as France and Britain. These officers were part of the elite class, educated and influenced by Enlightenment ideals that emphasized individual liberty, legal equality and representative government. At home, the autocratic rule of Tsar Alexander I, although initially seen as reformist, began to disappoint those hoping for systemic change. While Alexander's reign included some progressive policies such as educational reforms and the establishment of ministries, his reluctance to grant a constitution or abolish serfdom left reform-minded individuals disillusioned. His later years were marked by conservative retrenchment, including censorship and repression. By the time Alexander I died suddenly in 1825, the reformists were eager for change. The political instability surrounding the succession crisis further fueled the discontent. With Alexander's death, his younger brother Nicholas I assumed the throne, bypassing their elder brother Constantine, who had secretly renounced his claim. This confusion provided an opportunity for a group of conspirators, later known as the Decembrists, to launch their revolt on December 14, 1825. The Decembrists were primarily young aristocratic officers divided into two main groups, the Northern Society and the Southern Society. Despite some ideological differences, both groups shared a common goal: the replacement of Russia's autocratic regime with a constitutional government. The Northern Society, based in St. Petersburg, advocated for moderate reforms. They aimed to establish a constitutional monarchy, restrict the powers of the Tsar, and introduce civil liberties. The Southern Society, centered in Ukraine, adopted a more radical approach, calling for the abolition of the monarchy and the creation of a republic. Both factions agreed on the need to end serfdom, which they viewed as an institution that degraded human dignity and stifled economic progress. These groups' motivations stemmed from their exposure to liberal ideas, frustrations with Russia's political stagnation, and moral opposition to the inhumane treatment of serfs. The Decembrists believed that Russia needed sweeping changes to align itself with the modern, progressive European powers. On the morning of December 14, 1825, approximately 3,000 soldiers loyal to the Decembrists gathered in Senate Square in St. Petersburg. They refused to swear allegiance to Nicholas I, instead demanding a constitutional government. The rebels hoped for wider support from the military and public, but their plans were poorly organized and lacked a clear strategy. Nicholas I, informed of the revolt in advance, acted decisively. He deployed loyal troops to confront the insurgents. The confrontation ended in bloodshed. Nicholas's forces opened fire on the unprepared rebels, killing and wounding dozens. The remaining insurgents were arrested, and the revolt was swiftly crushed. In the aftermath, the Decembrist leaders were tried and sentenced. 5 were executed by hanging, while many others were exiled to Siberia, where they became symbols of martyrdom for the cause of reform. Although the Decembrist revolt failed in its immediate goals, its significance lies in its lasting impact on Russian society and politics. The uprising had profound implications for the trajectory of Russia's development, particularly in several key areas. The Decembrist revolt marked the beginning of organized opposition to autocracy in Russia. For the first time, a group of elites openly challenged the authority of the Tsar, calling for systemic reforms. This event inspired future generations of revolutionaries, including the populist Narodniks, socialist intellectuals, and ultimately the Bolsheviks. The Decembrists became a symbol of resistance and sacrifice. revered by later reformers who sought to complete the mission of political and social transformation. The failed revolt had the opposite effect of its intended goals in the short term. Nicholas I, deeply shaken by the Decembrists' challenge, adopted a repressive stance that would define his reign. Determined to prevent further dissent, he expanded censorship, strengthened the secret police, and implemented strict control over education and intellectual life. His regime became synonymous with autocracy and conservatism, delaying meaningful reforms and deepening the rift between the state and society. The Decembrist demand for the abolition of serfdom brought renewed attention to this pressing issue. Although serfdom remained intact for decades after the revolt, the moral and economic arguments raised by the Decembrists laid the groundwork for later reforms. Tsar Alexander II's eventual emancipation of the serfs in 1861 can be seen as part of a broader historical process initiated by voices like those of the Decembrists. The Decembrist revolt highlighted the role of the Russian intelligentsia in advocating for change. The Decembrists, themselves products of elite education and exposure to Western ideas, demonstrated how intellectuals could become agents of reform. This role would only expand throughout the 19th century as writers, philosophers, and reformers like Alexander Herzen and Fyodor Dostoevsky grappled with Russia's path forward. The exile of many Decembrists to Siberia turned the region into a symbol of political martyrdom and moral resistance. Despite the harsh conditions, the exiled Decembrists brought education, culture, and reformist ideals to Siberian communities. Their perseverance in exile resonated deeply with future generations of reformers, strengthening the resolve to challenge autocracy. The Decembrist Revolt of 1825, though unsuccessful, remains a landmark event in Russian history. It revealed the deep contradictions within Russia's autocratic system and planted the seeds of a revolutionary tradition that would eventually lead to the collapse of the Romanov dynasty. While Nicholas I's repressive policies stifled dissent for decades, the Decembrists' ideals endured, inspiring future movements for reform and revolution. The Decembrists' legacy is one of courage, sacrifice, and vision. They were the first to articulate the need for a modern, constitutional Russia, a vision that would drive reformers and revolutionaries alike for the next century. By challenging the status quo, they paved the way for Russia's eventual transformation into a society that grappled with ideas of liberty, equality, and justice. Their story remains a testament to the enduring struggle for freedom in Russian history.